The crimes of William Burke, though hideous, were far from unique and quite unspectacular for their time and place. In contrast, his trial, execution, dissection and demonisation were remarkable, not least for the public interest they aroused. No trial, observed the Edinburgh Evening Courant of the 25th of December 1829, has excited such an unusual and intense interest. On the opening day of criminal proceedings, the courtroom was besieged by onlookers eager to glimpse the Irish malefactors, whom the press described as cannibal butchers of their own species. As William Hare, the vilest of the two monsters, took the stand, expectation stood on tiptoe as the assembled crowds waited for ghoulish accounts of something they had often dreamed of, or imagined or heard recounted around an evening's fire, like a raw head and bloody bone story, but which they never, in their sober judgment, either feared or believed to be possible. In short, the press imaginatively dressed the trial in the garish garb of Gothic and peopled it with the denizens of the horror story. Here in the courtroom was an enacted tale of terror based on the immensely topical notion of body snatching, where modern medicine met the macabre with the added sensationalist appeal of degenerate Irishmen in the lead roles. This begs the question, was it the Irishness of the body snatchers which inspired such, right, you're going to kill me for this, I know John's going to kill me for this, fear and loathing in 19th century Edinburgh? This is a moot point, which deserves to be dissected. I'm so sorry about it. Indeed, as Willie Maley observes, it would be a grave error to overlook it. Furthermore, as he suggests, that by avoiding this point, we are guilty of hushing up or leaving a false trail. We are Burking and Haring. To avoid smothering this crucial... You notice I got smothering in there as well. I'm getting into an absolute puntastic mood now. To avoid smothering this crucial piece of social history, it is worth employing a symptomatic reading of the narratives, both fictional and factual, surrounding the body-snatching cause célèbre. Read thus, one can argue that the moral panic surrounding Burke and Hare, combined with their subsequent Gothic treatment, are metaphors for socially specific fears, prejudices and anxieties such as hibernophobia and xenophobic anti-Catholicism circulating in 19th century Scotland, fueled by scientific racism and the discourses of degeneration. Utter lack of sanitation, high propensity for contagious disease, little and polluted air, filth, stench, refuse. Thus, Owen Dudley Edwards describes the living conditions endured by the Donegal militia, to which William Burke enlisted on the 8th of May 1815. Such a description could equally be applied to the slum tenements of Edinburgh. Disease was rife, hunger was the norm, and death was a daily occurrence to these unfortunates who found themselves in these nests of deprivation. Unsurprisingly, these haunts of the urban poor came to be categorised as sites of degeneration, lairs of iniquity, in which lurked the lowest rabble, full of menacing oaths and ferocity, and women half-nude, half-drunk, and more than half-savage. Sounds like Newcastle Quayside on a Saturday night, doesn't it? Amongst these deprived and depraved inhabitants of the West Port were Burke and Hare's nominal wives, Helen MacDougall and Margaret, who had the name Lucky Hare. I have no idea why that is. Described by North as poor, miserable, bony, skinny, scranky, wizened jades, both without the distant approach to good-lookingness, either in any part of their form or any feature of their face. Peevish, sulky, savage and cruel, and evidently familiar from earliest life with all the wretchedness of guilt and pollution, most mean in look, manner, mind, dress, the very dregs of prostitution. He's a real fence-sitter, Christopher North. He really doesn't like to come out and say what he thinks. As to whether, in the case of Burke and Hare, the female of the species could be seen as more deadly than the male. Despite the fact that both women, along with William Hare, walked free, it is almost certain they were implicated to a greater or lesser extent in the 16 murders to which Burke confessed. For North, They are exemplars of evil, each carrying the stigmata or degeneracy in their repulsive physiognomies. There's the rather beautiful Lucky Hare holding her baby. Of the two, however, it is Lucky Hare whom North observes the most of the she-devil, clutching her yellow, yammering infant, the image of its father, in her arm, in prison as we saw her as if it were a bundle of rags. For North, any pretence of maternal feeling in Hare's Lady is a ruse and the child nothing more than a prop to solicit sympathy and save her from the scaffold. In this, North argues, she is similar to the angry beggars who dash their children's head against the pavement in order to importune favours from passers-by. In short, she is part of an unnatural and degenerate class who display their utter lack of moral value, a class upon whose children the sins of the fathers are brutally and manifestly visited. Note, for example, the jaundiced appearance of the child, suggesting it is infected with the dissoluteness of its parents. Added to this, it carries the same repellent and criminal features as its father, signifying its genetic propensity for crime. Perhaps it would need one of those metal head braces and it might be okay. In short, it embodies morbid heredity, codified in theories of dysgenics and symptomatic of 19th century Gothic anxieties concerning degeneration, devolution, and criminal man. Sickly, defective, and barely recognisable as a human infant, this spawn of a degenerate culture symbolises the terrifying possibility of a reverse ontogeny, or that if evolution is a ladder, it may be possible to start moving down it and thereby meet up with the degenerate Irish. Despite the fact it was shamelessly mocked by Blackwoods and discredited across the medical establishment, phrenology provides a grimly ironic epilogue to the tale of Burke and Hare. Though the apex of quackery, its apologists continue to argue its validity as an exact science. One would like to find a little discrepancy now and then, argued an anonymous acolyte of Coombe, but no such thing ever occurs. Phrenology is a rule without exceptions. William Burke would prove him and this pseudoscience wrong. After being hanged on the 28th of January 1929, Burke's body was donated for useful dissection to the Medical School of Edinburgh University. After post-mortem examinations were undertaken by several eminent scientists, Coombe included, a lecture was delivered on the subject of the criminal's brain by Edinburgh University's Dr. Munro, who was as mad as a hatter. He was a really insane man. Far from endorsing the pseudoscience which labelled him congenitally degenerate, his cranium, as Henry Lonsdale, a medical student, observes, resembles that of a woman and could hardly have been taken for that of a murderer. In direct contradiction to the expected phrenological profile, Burke's organs of benevolence, amativeness, and conscientiousness were larger than average, while the organ of destructiveness was way below the average size. Indeed, as the president of the Royal Medical Society, Thomas Stone, acknowledged, so hardly did Burke's bumps fit the Combian theory that his last work may be called a triumph of destructiveness. He ended up Burking phrenology. Despite the curiously anomalous condition of Burke's brain, science had yet to finish with Burke's earthly remains. His eviscerated carcass was exhibited for the edification and voyeuristic titillation of the baying mob, 25,000 people, with enough macabre spectacle to satisfy the most Epicurean appetite for horrors. The cadaver, with the top of the skull temporarily replaced, was, according to Alexander Leighton, placed naked upon a black marble table in the anatomical theatre. There were as yet no signs of corruption, so that the death pallor, as it contrasted with the black marble table, showed strongly to the inquiring and often revolting eye. But the face had become more blue, and the shaved head with marks of blood not entirely wiped off it rather gave effect to a grin, which the features had settled in at the moment of death. Notably, in this gruesome description, attention is drawn to the face, which Leighton recalls had retained in the rictus grimus a bitter expression of the very scorn with which he looked upon the world, which pushed him out of it, having in his person defaced the image of the maker. Here Leighton takes facial characteristics entirely consistent with a violent asphyxial death and shapes the facts of actuality into a grisly moral message. Burke was not, in his last moments, choking to death, but snarling at the world and at God, a clear indicator of the hubristic impenitence and diabolical malignity concealed behind his innocuous face. Thus, desecrated, dissected and damned, William Burke was consigned to hell and to history, leaving behind him a new word for the English language, Burking. I can show you how to do it. I won't do it all the way through though. Countless tales of terror, but few material possessions other than 4 books, his Milesian skull, his cadaver, and the book covers, tobacco pouches, and portrait canvases made from his flayed skin, which were given as gruesome mementos to the civilised gentlemen medics, amongst them George Combe, who had labelled him monster. More tellingly, though, in Burking phrenology, his bequest to Blackwoods was an endorsement of their suggestion that, as John said before, fool and phrenologist are terms nearly synonymous. Thank you.